Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to give it a little bit longer, probably about a minute, just to allow as many people as possible to join our webinar this morning. So bear with us, we'll be starting very, very shortly. So welcome everybody to this next Morgan Hunt webinar this morning on the theme of a story of mental strength and resilience. My name is Claire Canary and I'm a board director at Morgan Hunt, and I also lead on diversity and inclusion. And for those of you who don't know Morgan Hunt, we are an award-winning UK recruitment business with offices in Glasgow, Manchester, Birmingham and London. We were founded 30 years ago, and we provide recruitment services to organisations across the public, private and not-for-profit sectors. But really the focus of our session today will be on my guest, Lewis Hatchett, and his inspiring journey of mental health and resilience. Lewis is a former professional cricketer who defied the odds to build an exceptional sporting career despite facing significant physical challenges. And you will hear all about that very, very shortly. Just before we start, a few points in terms of our format this morning. I will pass over to Lewis shortly, who will talk us through his journey and highlighting how his experience has influenced, his thoughts in terms of mindset and resilience. We'll also have some time after Lewis's presentation for your questions. So if at any point over the course of the talk, please, and you have a question, please post that in the chat on YouTube. We will see all your questions and we'll endeavour to answer as many as possible as time allows. But for now, I'm going to pass you over to Lewis. Welcome, Lewis.
Thanks, Claire. Really appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. I'm always humbled to be asked to come and speak and present and do as much as I can. So I hope you're all having a cracking start to your Wednesday. And I'm hopefully going to today will be about sharing a little bit about my journey, but then giving you some sort of insights and hopefully some practical takeaways that you can leave with, whether it's for yourself, for your teams, can be even for your friends, for your family. Before we get started, feel free to throw in the chat where you're tuning in from, what your setup's like. If you want to, I'd love for you to be able to take a photo of what your setup is looking like, what you're potentially, how it's looking for you, and share it over on LinkedIn. So go and tag me over on LinkedIn, or if you want to tag me on another social media, I'd love to connect with those of you that are following in, that are tuning in. So as Claire very kindly mentioned, just a little bit about me is that currently I'm a mindset mental performance coach for athletes, for corporations, a range of different high performers that I currently work with. I'm a former professional cricketer, which is a vast amount of what this story will be about today. But I'm also the creator of an app called MindStrong Sport. And I'm also currently a student of performance psychology at Bangor University. But other than that, I am just an athlete myself. I'm a mentor, I'm a brother, I'm a son, and a friend to my friends and colleagues. So that's just a little bit about me. But my journey into professional cricket is one that not only am I proud of having achieved, it was my childhood dream, but it is one that is slightly different to many people that play not only the sport of cricket, but also just sport in general. Because to understand that, I have to go back to the first day, the day I was born. And the day I was born, I was diagnosed straight away from birth with a condition called Poland syndrome. Now, Poland syndrome is pretty rare. It's anywhere between 20 to 100,000 people that have it, 1 in 20, 1 in 100,000 people that have it. And there's no known cause as to why you get it. It's not a condition that is passed on, other than that it's just totally random. but it manifests itself slightly differently from each person that has it. For some people, they have deformities in their hands, they have limb differences. But for me, it means I'm missing my right pectoral muscle and two ribs that are directly behind it. So if you have ever seen a cricket match, then you will understand that a cricket ball is an incredibly solid projectile that moves at roughly 90 plus mile an hour. And if you get hit, you don't just break bones. But for me, if I was to get struck in the upper right portion of my chest, there is only skin that is protecting my lung. And so it wouldn't just wind me, it would potentially cause a fatal injury. And growing up, I was initially told on that day one, my dad is a keen sportsman. He asked the doctor, could my firstborn son play any sport? And the doctor said, no, he won't be able to play a sport like rugby, which is fair, but he won't be able to play a sport like cricket. And so I grew up with this condition, and I had a younger brother, just 1 year younger than me. Now, what I get from this condition, what it means on a day-to-day basis, is that because I'm missing a very large muscle on the right side of my body, I have shoulder muscles that have to compensate. I have my traps that have to compensate for a lot of that missing muscle. And ultimately, I get, whether it's aches and pains, anything from aches and pains to sheer muscle spasms instantaneously, but day-to-day headaches that occur because I have to manage the condition itself. I try to keep myself in good shape. Obviously, I became a professional athlete, and that's a part of the story. But on the right there, you can also see a chest guard that, because if I was to get struck by a cricket ball, it could be fatal. I actually had a Kevlar chest guard made when I was turned pro. So it won't only just stop a cricket ball, but it would stop a bullet, which is very, very promising when you are facing some of the world's fastest bowlers. But my journey getting into cricket is probably no different from many, many athletes that play sport, but play cricket themselves. And I just started playing cricket in the garden with my brother. I just loved it. We were introduced by my granddad, just a sport. And even though I'd been told I couldn't play it, my parents didn't really stop me from playing it. They just saw that I was a sport that I enjoyed and I loved doing. So they allowed me to do it. And all I wanted to do as just a young kid, wanted to beat my brother. I just wanted to beat my younger brother at absolutely everything. I wanted to thrash him, whether it was just running to a lamppost. I wanted to beat him at that. Whether it was wrestling the remote control off him in the lounge, I wanted to beat him to the ground for that. So sure, if anyone's got a sibling, you can probably relate to something like that. But as we grew older, we were introduced to a range of different sports and playing golf and football. But then cricket was one that I just took a real liking to. My dad would take us to professional matches, and I really found it a game that I wanted to get involved in. I wanted to be a fast bowler. I just wanted to be an opening bowler. I saw these guys opening the bowling at really high speeds. And I thought, this is something that I want to do. I want to be those guys. They've got all this responsibility, and they're big, strong guys. And that's something that I want to do. So one day, my parents say that I was just sitting at the table, and I just slammed my fists on the table and said, right, I want to be a professional cricketer. And I was only about 14 at the time. And they said, right, well, how are you going to do that? I said, well, there's a trial coming up. There's a trial coming up for Sussex underage groups, and I want to get there. Now, I went to a state school, and if you know anything about cricket, it's getting a bit of a bad rap at the moment because the private school sector is heavily dominant in cricket, and so state schools don't have massive facilities for playing cricket. My school didn't even have a cricket bat. We didn't have anything. So I couldn't play cricket at school. I knew that I needed to join a club, so I joined a club, and I just loved playing cricket there. But the trial that I wanted to get into was full of private school kids that when I turned up, there were 100 kids, and they were all bigger, stronger, faster, better than me. And I was this scrawny little kid with oversized clothing that my mum bought from the Friday ad down here in the South. That if anyone knows what the Friday ad is, like a gum tree, essentially, or eBay. But they grabbed together some of my kit, and I went off to this trial, and I realized I wasn't the best player there. I was definitely, they were going to select the top 15, and I was in the bottom 15. I wasn't one of the best players there. So I thought, how am I going to stand out? How am I going to be able to get in that top 15 when I don't have the skills, I don't have the physical ability, I don't have what they are looking for? And I thought, well, the only thing I can do is really show some form of a good attitude. I can show that I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to get better. And so every waking moment I got when I was at those trials, I would go up to the coaches and I would tag on their sleeves and just say, how can I get better? How can I do this? How can I do what they're doing? How can I improve? Can you take a look at this? And I would constantly try and get myself in their eye line so they could see that I was willing to try and get better. Over a course of 6 weeks, I just did that incessantly to the point where they probably just hated me. But we get to the day where they're announcing the squad, and they go through the team sheet and they go through it 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 13, 14, 15, and I hear my name shouted. And I jump up and I grab my shirt, and on the right you can see is the day that was the day I came back, and me and my brother had made the representative team for Sussex. And we're Sussex born lads. We're down here in the south of England in Brighton and Hove, and it's our home county. And playing for my home county was exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't want to play for anyone else. I wanted to play for Sussex. That was my goal. So I'd made this representative team. I'd achieved my first goal. I had gone out, set my eyes on it, and I'd achieved it. I did it in a slightly unique way. I stood out slightly differently, and I got the shirt. I got into the team. But 15 players in that squad, and if anyone knows cricket, 11 make the field. So that means 4 sit on the bench. And every week a team sheet would come out, and that team sheet would say who was playing in the game and who was sitting out. And I would run to the door every time I would see this letter posted through. It's now probably an email or a text message, but I would run to the door and rip it open, super excited, and then go, oh, I'm on the bench and I'm not playing. So I'll be, okay, wait for the next game. Next week, the letter would come through post. I rip it open, running to the door. Oh, I'm on the bench again. And it would happen week after week. Every week, I could tell that the coaches weren't really rating me. They weren't really thinking I was any good. And so, again, my dad, seeing that essentially I was going to go through the entire season and just be moved on at the end of it and passed on and thought, oh, you're just going to be a spare part. He said, you're going to need to do something to stand out slightly differently. You're going to need to find a way in which you are going to capture their attention. And the idea that I've got for you is that I think you should just call up the professional squad, the head coach of the professional squad, and ask if you can go to their training session. Now, the idea of that is kind of like calling up Pep Guardiola at Man City and just saying, can I come and have a kickabout with the boys on a weekend? I was petrified of this idea. The idea of he had found the phone number. He gave me a phone and he said, don't come out this room until you've called that head coach and you've asked him if you can go and train with them tomorrow. I was 15 years old and I was terrified. I was sweating. I was writing scripts on how to call up this head coach. I was practicing them. I was in the room for what felt like a full day. But I was in there for hours practicing what I was going to say and eventually plucking up the courage to call this number and call up this head coach and ask him, hey, look, I wondered if you needed anyone to bowl at the pros tomorrow. I'm happy to come and be a spare part. And straight away, coach said, no, we don't need anyone. Thanks for calling. Cheers. Bye. Don't know who you are. Off you go. So came out the room dejected and my dad said, what did he say? He said, no, Dad. I didn't get an opportunity. He said, okay, call him tomorrow. So again, we go through the same rigmarole the next morning. My dad hands me the number, phone, and I go through again. I change my script. I'm sweating. I'm panting. I'm panicking. I eventually pluck up the courage to call the number. Hello, Mr. Robinson. Can I come and train with you guys tomorrow? No, sorry. We're absolutely fine. Stop it, basically. Next day, Dad comes to me again with a phone. And I did this for weeks. And he kept coming to me every day, just giving me this phone number, sometimes changing the number to call someone else and asking if I could just come and turn up at these training sessions. Eventually, one day, pretty much the day I was about to give up, that my dad said, I call up the number and I asked, can I come and train? Like, do you need anyone? And by this time I was pretty much on a first name basis with everyone because I just pestered them so much. And they said, yeah, actually we've got a couple of guys that are injured, sick. We do need someone on a bit of an emergency call. So can you be in tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? I was 100% I can be. I want, and next thing I know, I'm standing in the changing room of guys who the night before I was trying to get autographs off because they're my own heroes. And I'm stuck to the wall through sheer fear. I don't really know what I'm doing. And I'm like, don't do anything. Don't say anything. Don't mess up. And I had no right being in that room. I had no right being there from ability, from skill, from physical ability, any of it. I just was there through knocking on the door and getting myself in the room. And then my willingness to want to learn off those in the room, to see what some of the best in the world were doing, to see how they were doing it. Guys that, like I said, I was trying to get autographs off. I got to see how they were training, how they were talking, how they were eating, how they were moving, everything. And I would just take mental notes. And then I would stay there pretty much all day. And then when I would go home, I would just start training and I would start implementing some of that stuff into my life. And I once they let me in and they allowed me to come and train with them. I just kept turning up. I just kept coming back. And so I was there day after day, helping them out, training bowling. But I was, like I said, 15, 16. I wasn't very strong at the time. And suddenly one day I was bowling in the nets and helping them out in a training session. And bang, I felt my back go. And I couldn't bend down, touch my toes. I couldn't really stand without being in agony. I couldn't lie down without being in agony. And I had to go and have a bunch of scans. And it turned out that I had fractured my spine. And this was the first time my body had really failed me. I had realized that my body had failed me. It was the first time that I had got an injury that stopped me from playing from sport. But in that moment, I was told to stop playing cricket, one, for my condition and my back, but also the fact that, yeah, the odds were really, really against me. But I realized that I hadn't spent much time making my body the thing that I could stand out from. So rather than it being the thing that kept me back, how could I make it stand out? And how could I make my physical ability be the thing that actually was my strength, even though it was a perceived weakness? And so what I did was I went to the training facilities during my time of being injured. I snuck in and I went into the gym to find out who was the strongest players, who were the fittest, what were they doing, how were they training, wrote all of that down, and then went and worked on my fitness and my strength, because I never wanted a coach to turn to me and say, we can't select you because of your physical ability or because of your condition. I wanted them to go, well, you're the fittest player in this squad, so that's already counted for. Let's look at your skill. And I could deal with if my skill wasn't good enough, because I can develop that and I can improve that over time. But I never wanted them to turn and say, we're not going to pick you because we don't think you're physically able. So I worked for 2 years. I unfortunately had to spend all of that time either in a back brace for about a year. I was wearing a corset whilst doing a lot of my school exams. It took them ages to find the fracture, but then it took ages for it to heal. I spent 2 years working on my physical ability, and 2 years out of a sport for a kid who's 16 to 18. And I know this now, coaching a lot of kids around that age group, that is a tough time. They want to be playing, and you want to be playing. You're seeing everyone go off and do what you want to do. And that is really challenging. But for me, I just kept my head down. I would go into the training facility late at night until I was kicked out in the evening. And I would just go and work incessantly at trying to get myself better. Eventually become 18 years old and I'm back, I'm fit, I'm ready to go. And the cricket season had ended. And I was presented with an opportunity. Do I go to Australia or do I go to university? Now, it probably doesn't take a rocket scientist to say which one I took. Off I flew to Australia. But before I went with this key goal in mind, which was, how do I become a professional cricketer? And I stood in front of this head coach that I had called, the guy that didn't really rate me very much. And I said, what do I need to do in order to be a professional cricketer? Give me a list of things that I need to do. And he said, you're going to need a massive notebook for all the things that we've got for you. You're going to need to write all of this down. So I wrote this huge bunch of notes down and everything that I need to improve on, flew out to Australia. Now, this is 2008-9, and it is when, Facebook was about 2 years old. So you're talking, the only way I could communicate with people, it wasn't being able to send selfies and progress pics and transformations and things like that of how good I was getting on and how I was improving. It was head down, take my notes out there and hope that when I come back, they see the improvement, and then maybe send an email and a text message to my mum every now and then to say that I hadn't been eaten by a shark. But I ticked off everything on that list. That was the hardest I ever worked. And I came back from Australia, stood in front of the coaches, and the trouble was, they had been working on a bunch of athletes here in the UK that were right in front of them, and I hadn't been in sight. But I came back knowing I'd done everything, but they didn't want to give me an opportunity because they felt the guys that we've invested in here, we're going to go with them. And also, this kid with this funny condition, like, we don't think that you're the right sort of fit for this. So I sat down with them and I said, look, I want to make a bet. I want to make a bit of a gamble here and a bit of a wager. And the wager is that, let me play the next 3 games for the reserve team and let me open the bowling in those 3 games. And if I do well in those 3 games, then let me carry on doing that. But if I don't, I'll ride off into the sunset. You'll never see me again. And they're like, wow, what a great deal. This is awesome. You're telling me that we get to get rid of you if you actually don't do well? I was like, yep, that is the wager. So all you've got to do is give me the opportunity to open the bowling, be the number 1 bowler in the reserve team. And they're like, perfect, we'll take that bet. And in those 3 games, I broke a couple of records. I took 21 wickets in 3 games, and they're like, damn it, we've got to hold up our end of the bargain. So they kept me on doing that job for a little bit. So much so that within a few weeks, the coach comes up to me and goes, Lewis, you're actually playing so well that we need you to jump on the bus with the first team, the full professional squad, and come and be on the bench there. I was like, damn it, I'm on the bench again, but this is a good bench to be on. I was working in a smoked salmon factory, just putting petrol in my car with the wages that I was earning from that. I quit that job, jumped on the bus, started traveling around the country with a full professional squad and being on the bench for that team. And when you go from game to game, I had the best seats in the house. I would turn up to every game and I would basically be starting to look for autographs from the other team, or sometimes even my own team, and thinking, wow, I've got the best seats, being able to sit on the sidelines and watch these games from where I'm at. My friends had texted me saying how cool it is. And then that was all fine up until a game when we were going to Middlesex and we were playing in London. And when we played this game in London, it was one of the most interesting games that I was going to be playing in my entire career, because of the 22 players that were playing, 15 were from international teams from all around the world. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a great game for me to sit on my sideline, have the best seats in the house. This is going to be unbelievable. And so we get to this game and I'm sitting there getting ready, setting up my stool on the side. Like, this is where I'm going to be sitting. I can get some autographs, sneak those around. And a half an hour before the game's about to start, coach comes running up to me and goes, Lewis, our Yasir, our basically number one bowler in the team, who's from Pakistan, he's just done his ankle in the warm-up. He can't play. You're going to have to play. Here's your shirt. Here's your cap. The first person you're bowling to is the England captain. Good luck. Half an hour later, I'm standing at the top of my run-up, about to bowl my first ever ball in professional cricket to the England captain at the time. I get announced onto the ground. I don't have a name and number on the back of my shirt. No one knows who I am. There's people behind me saying, who the hell's this guy? They are my own fans from my own team shouting that because they don't know who I am. I then take a deep breath because I was panicking inside, pretty much forgot how to bowl, looked at the England captain, looked at where I needed to bowl, took a deep breath, focused on what I was about to do, and then ran in and bowled. And that game went well. That game went okay. I got through that game. I took a few wickets in each innings. And it's a 4-day game. If you don't know anything about cricket, that game lasts for 4 whole days. And it was an incredible game and an amazing experience. And I held my own in it, considering that I had been told half an hour before the game that I was going to be playing. I then got into the car and into the bus and we moved on to the next fixture. We moved on to the next fixture, which was up into the north of England. And that game was where my life completely changed. So we go to play Leicester in the Midlands. And I then thinking, well, the guy who was fit, he comes straight back in and he actually is just going to jump back into the squad. But the coach said, look, we're actually going to give the other guys a chance. We're going to give you a chance and we're going to drop some other guys. So then in that game, in the second innings, I took 5 wickets. And that's like scoring a hat-trick in football. And it was the greatest day of my life. I remember coming off the pitch, sort of waving to the crowd, doing what I needed to do, and then sort of getting into this green car back to the hotel. And the coach that had said, we don't think you're good enough, that had said no to me over and over again, said, we're going to go with these guys over here. He turned me around just before I'm about to get into this green car and he said, Lewis, you're going to be a professional cricketer. We're going to give you a 3-year contract. And that was the day that I signed for Sussex. It was the day that I signed and I got my career. Now, playing cricket as a profession is the greatest thing ever. It's unbelievable. And traveling around the world and doing the thing you love, it's amazing. And unfortunately, I then 6 years later was playing a game about to prepare for Pakistan coming over. I'm in the best shape I've ever played and doing the thing I love. And bang, I felt something in my back go. And I had unfortunately refractured my spine. Within a month, I saw a surgeon who then said, Lewis, you're not only going to have to rest, you're actually going to have to retire from this game of cricket because you've fractured your back and it's making its way towards your spinal cord. This is not a sport that you're going to be able to continue playing. This is not a case of if this is going to happen again. It's a case of just when. And my body had really started to tell me, look, Lou, you can't do this. This is something that you really struggle with doing at this level. I could play cricket on weekends with my friends, but playing at a professional level where you're doing it day in, day out, that was something I had to stop doing. So at 26 years old, I was ripped away from the sport. I was ripped out and told, look, you can't do this. So you can't be playing this sport at this level. And so I left. But 26 years old, you're told, okay, you're done. And the challenge that I'd faced then was I had placed a lot of my identity on the fact that I was a cricketer. I was a cricketer. If you said what I'm up to, I'd have said, I've got cricket coming up. I've got a game coming up, a tournament, a training, whatever. And when that was all taken away, that hit me hard because an instant loss of status and an instant loss of who I was really lost me. And I then came out of it and I did a range of different things and trying to figure out who I was. But I'm a very curious person. And I realized that there was a part of my story. I started telling my story like I'm telling you right now. I would get booked for speaking engagements and I would start telling that to help motivate people to say, look, I believe if I can achieve this, then you can achieve so much as well. And that then led into a much more curiosity about other people's stories, other athletes' stories. And so I then started a podcast called Raising Your Game. And I wanted to I wanted to get the insight from a range of different athletes about what made them who they were and their mindset of what they were. So their mindset and their mental performance, how did they go about that? Where did that come from? And then what were some of the tips that they would have for other people in their own journeys? Because I realized everyone's journey is different, but that feeling of identity can sometimes be wrapped up in who we are, in what we do. And I wanted to understand that from a load of people. So I opened up my black book of people that I knew and started interviewing them. And now at over 190 episodes in Raising Your Game podcast, I've got a range of different people, from athletes to coaches to academics. But then my curiosity grew even more. And I was not only coaching athletes, young cricketers come to you and they want to know, how do I bowl fast? How do I do this, that, the other? But the conversation changed. The conversation that they were asking, once they'd heard about my story, they'd listened to the podcast, they then started asking me things about, well, how do I build confidence? How do I build resilience? How do I overcome the fear of failure? And that then really led me down to my studies, down to my master's in performance psychology. And through that, then a lot of my work began to move towards mindset and mental performance. And then I've just managed to get myself into some amazing places where working with people on their mindset and mental performance. And again, as the pandemic hit, the conversation around mental health began to grow. And we are all looking for good mental health. There's no doubt about it. But one thing I've realized was, the more and more we were talking about it, and I was talking about it on the podcast, the thing that not only I was seeing with clients, but also with people that I was bringing on the show, was that those who feel good about themselves, those that understand maybe who they are or where they're going and what they're doing, those that are doing that conversation around mental health was moving towards more around mental strength. It was moving towards this idea that, yes, I may be having tough moments in my life, I may be having challenges, but if I can face this with strength rather than just talking about it, and strength is built through action and through doing things, then actually the outcome of that is that I feel better about myself by default. And so that allowed me to then start the app of MindStrong Sport, where I start to develop mindset, mental skills in athletes to help them build a stronger mind. I like to think of it as the mental gym for an athlete. And so I would continue that work with not only athletes, but then businesses and corporations, where they were recognizing that the generations that were coming into business were all talking around mental health. However, if you are someone who may be interested in whether it's therapy or just conversations around the mental health space, I'm a big believer that talking about mental health is great. Bringing up your issues and bringing them to the surface to understand them is great. However, if you do not take action towards them and you don't do anything about it, then that's where you make the fault. That's where you struggle. And that's where you potentially make a mistake, because you are not building mental strength to take on the challenges that are undoubtedly going to be there. And we can't deny that we aren't living in a world that is full of challenges. We live in a world where if we're trying to achieve something, it looks a little bit like this. You have this plan where you're going towards your goal. Oh, it's going to be easy. I'm going to get there straight away. But the reality, and I'm sure many of you that are listening understand, that it is a terrifying journey along the way, but it can be a great adventure at the same time. There are ups and downs, there are peaks and troughs, there are valleys, there are pits, there is everything in between. And the reality of that is that journey that you're going on, the journey that you face, and this is the same in sport, and I find this a truism through sport and life, is that life doesn't really care about your feelings. Life doesn't really care about how you feel about that situation. And so when you're faced with that, the road that you're going to be facing, the challenges you're going to be facing, that's not going to get any easier. On the podcast, I had a 50-kilometer world champion, Carla Molinaro, and she said something brilliant in one of our episodes, which was that 50 kilometers never gets any shorter. So I have to be stronger to get to that finish line. It's so true. That finish line is never going to come a meter closer to her, but she has to be stronger. So it's about, how do we build the characteristics? How do we build the resilience and the mindset for us to take on the challenges that we have? And I'm a big believer that whether we are looking for performance, whether we are looking for an outcome, a result, a lot of us think that if I work at certain things, then I'm going to be able to, that's going to turn me into the person that can do that. If I go and take on these challenges, then by the end of it, I'll become this person. But actually, I argue that you can actually start before that. And I did this myself. A lot of my journey was built on the the fact that before I saw my journey, I knew my journey was going to be challenging. I knew that was going to be something that was hard. However, I needed to adopt a mindset and an approach that I could use before I'd even taken that first step. I needed to know what that mindset looked like, exactly the character that I was going to need to be. Now, when I was younger, I didn't have the experience. So I used role models. I looked for role models in my life, and I looked for people that I wanted to be like, and then take the characteristics from them. Because I genuinely believe that character creates performance, rather than sometimes we think that performance and doing will create the mindset and the character. Now, that might be true, but I do think that before you see this goal, before you take on that goal and you see this big journey ahead of you, that you can think of, what type of character do I need to be to achieve what I want to do? And for me, if you don't know that answer, then it might be about thinking of people you want to be like, taking on those characteristics of those people that you want to be like. So that's a lot of my philosophy. My philosophy really stems around turning mental health into mental strength. But in my work and especially the stuff that I'm seeing now, there are kind of two areas that I want to talk around: perfectionism and resilience. And we undoubtedly live in a world right now that is seeing that journey, similar to that image that I showed you, it's going to be this perfectly straight line, and it's going to be seamless. And if we think of that going to be a nice, easy way, then we don't really build resilience within ourselves to get there, because we don't actually recognize that journey is going to be turbulent. So my area of study, and especially for my area of research at the moment, is in perfectionism, mainly because I am a recovering perfectionist myself. And I am very interested in not only individual perfectionism, but also the perceived perfectionism of leaders. So do leaders place some form of perfectionism onto their athletes, to their employees, to whoever it might be that they're leading? And the people that are following those leaders, do they feel that perfectionism from that leader? So a little bit about perfectionism, if you don't know too much about it. It is actually a beautiful paradox, because perfectionism has two sides to it. It has these beautiful sides of people that have high standards, they're driven, they're motivated, creative, and they inspire others. Having a perfectionist is actually a good thing. They're people that are very motivated. You want them in your team because they are driven. They have these high standards. However, the double-edged sword to perfectionism is that they do doubt their actions. If something is not perfect, then I have doubt over the fact that, why would I do this if it's not going to be perfect? They have concerns over failure, mistakes. They need things to be organized all in the right way, because why would I take the next step if it's just not going to be the perfect one, if it's not going to be at this high standard that I've set myself? And then they procrastinate over that. It creates procrastination, because if I'm to take this next high level step, I need it to be at high level. Now, I've had on the podcast some of the leaders, actually one of the godfathers of perfectionism, Dr. Gordon Flett, on the podcast, but most recently had Patrick Goudreau, Professor Patrick Goudreau, on the podcast, who spoke about a new model of excellencism, which is, if you want to dive into that, it's for anyone who listens to podcasts, it's a 2-hour podcast on the model of excellencism over perfectionism. So just look for the Raising Your Game podcast, and it's one of the most recent episodes we had. It was probably one of my favorites. But it's all about excellencism, is about taking these good parts of perfectionism and trying to reduce and remove the poor parts, because we set essentially such high standards. So it's about lowering our standards, lowering our expectations, but still aiming up, but still aiming for something that is excellent and adaptable in the situation that we're in. So there may be people that are watching this and think, I am a perfectionist. I maybe know people that are perfectionists. And that's actually holding me back from going after and taking that first step into that turbulent journey that we're going to be taking on towards the goals and the ambitions of, whether it's a goal that I want to achieve, an ambition, or maybe just a type of person that I want to be along the way. And so how do we get through perfectionism? We have to have the courage to be imperfect. It is a courageous act to be imperfect. In a world where we are showing ourselves how much perfection we think there should be, or the level of perfection that people should have, it takes courage in order to be imperfect. For me, I'm almost stuck with it. I can't say that my body is perfect. It's not symmetrical, it's asymmetrical. It's this weird body that has to do certain things in order to counteract parts that are missing. And so I have an imperfection within my body, if you want to see it as that. but I use it to my advantage. I use anything that I do have to my advantage. And I would argue that when we look through a perfectionistic lens, we're always looking at what we don't have. And so look at what you do have, what you can use in your life, and what you can take moving forward with the best tools that you have. Use the best of what you have to the best of your ability, and have the courage to be imperfect along the way. Because if you think it's going to be perfect, you won't make mistakes. And if you don't make mistakes, you will not learn and you will not grow. That's a very, sounds like obvious statement, and one that you probably hear from the water cooler all the time, but it is a truism, right? It is totally true, but it does take courage to be imperfect. If you can be the person that steps in front of other people and say, I'm willing to go out there and make mistakes and fail, to learn, to grow, to be better, that is a courageous act. It's a vulnerable act, but it is a courageous one. It's one of mental strength rather than vulnerability and weakness, if people want to think of it like that. But through perfectionism, a large part of us growing is through resilience. Now, I was very fortunate to meet and have on the podcast Professor Mustafa Sakar, who's done a lot of research in resilience in sport, and actually did a definition of resilience in sport. And there is many different definitions of resilience. Some people will either call it mental toughness. Some people will sometimes call it bounce back ability if you have a setback. But it is ultimately just the ability to use your personal qualities to withstand pressure and stress. But one of the interesting things, and especially in a corporate environment, and having done some work with Morgan Hunt as well before on this, we looked at, and Professor Mustafa Sakar and his colleague David Fletcher came up with something called a challenge support matrix, which is all about how do you create resilience, whether that is actually in your own life or actually in your teams that you're within. So their matrix that they created was essentially this very simple matrix of four quadrants and built on support and challenge. So environments that you potentially are in, and how do you build resilience in them? Now, ultimately, we're looking for this facilitative environment. That is where we create a resilient individual, because they are high in support and they are high in challenge. It's a challenging environment, but they are supported along the way. But many of us find ourselves in two environments in particular. One, an unrelenting environment where it is high challenge and low support. And sometimes I would actually argue we're moving more towards a comfortable environment where there's so much support, but very little challenge. And that creates people that are comfortable. That does not create resilience. If you're in a stagnant environment, that is probably one of the most boring and dull environments you find. It's just low support, low challenge, and that is, again, not building any resilience along the way. So how do we get ourselves into a facilitative environment? Now, there's many different ways you can provide challenge. Some people will create challenge in a variety of different ways, and you can do that. And I won't go into the challenge, but even support, there are a variety of different ways of how you can develop support for people, right? So it isn't necessarily just constantly giving people what they need. Sometimes having support, and a lot of support that I give to clients, is just accountability. It's actually saying, you said you would do this and you haven't done this, but how are we going to do it better moving forward? And that is support. It might sound like it's a challenge, but it's actually support. It's helping someone do what they have said they want to do. And so are you creating an environment, or what environment do you think currently that you are in? And is that building resilience in you? Do you find that it's an unrelenting environment? Or is it a comfortable environment? But what we want to try and adopt in the pursuit of building our resilience is what we call a challenge mindset. So it's not really about positive thinking. This is not about just constantly reframing things. It's about seeing things from a different perspective. And a challenge mindset is allowing yourself to go, okay, I've had a setback. I've had something that's difficult. I'm going to see this as a challenge rather than a threat. So I like to think of this, and this is an exercise that I really encourage you to take away with you and use with whether it's yourself or your colleagues. It's something called learning your ABCs. So the ABCs stand for adversity, behavior, and controllable statement, right? So an ABC is essentially when you're faced with an adversity. Now, for you, it might be you just receive criticism from a proposal in a team meeting. What is the behavior that then turns up around that? So you're faced with an adversity. In sport, it could be that in cricket, I get hit for six, right? And then the behavior that you face after that is what is the tendency that you tend to have? How do you tend to react to that situation? You might feel embarrassed and you withdraw from participating in the future meetings. But that's not going to help you build resilience. So what you want to do is create a controllable statement, something that you say, okay, well, I can take control of this situation. I can see this as a challenge. So when you receive that criticism moving forward, I will actively listen and see it as a new goal, right? So that's taking control of the situation. And when we take control of the situation, we move towards either the outcome that we want, and actually building ourselves from that. We take the adversity and we flip it and we make it into action and something we can do. Now, controllables come in many different forms, right? So you'll hear the statement, control what you can control the controllables. Great advice. And it is ultimately the biggest thing that I go to with athletes, corporate, anyone that I work with is like, what is in your control and can you do anything about it? Right. So controllables, very simply, I think even just the top two are ultimately the only two things you can really control in your life is what you think of yourself and what you expect of yourself. What you can expect of yourself is your mindset, your energy, your effort, your focus, your process, everything around that stuff that is really in your control. But then uncontrollables are what we tend to spend most of our time focusing on. And when we spend our time focusing on these, the outcomes, the results, what others think of us, other people's decisions, just your general day-to-day thoughts, because you can't control those, I'm sure. Many people, whilst listening here, have probably thought about, did I leave the oven on 3 times already? So those uncontrollables, when we focus on those, they detract our energy away from the things that matter, that we can actually do and take action. And in the process of taking action, we feel confidence, we build ourselves, and we actually work towards that character that we've said we wanted to be. So for you, it might be, okay, I'm faced with this challenge that's in front of me. I'm faced with something that's a tough thing. What is in my control right now? What behaviors, what ways and what actions do I need to take in order to do that? And it's a very, very simple sort of equation that I get people to throw themselves through, almost too simplistic. It's ultimately, I'm faced with something and go, can I do anything about it? If the answer is yes, then great, go and take action. If your coffee is not as warm as you thought it was going to be, can you do anything about it? Yes, I can complain to the barista if I want, but maybe there's some side effects to that of just seeing people thinking of what you might be like. But if there's nothing you can do about it, I've left the coffee shop and go, can I do anything about it? No. Then the second question is, can I accept it? And it's in that acceptance where the real work happens. The ability to flex your acceptance muscle to say, okay, I'm now no longer going to focus on the things I can't control, and I'm going to focus on the things I can control. And I'm going to accept it. Because if I don't accept it, I'm just going to suffer. And if you find that anything that you are stressed, anxious, frustrated, angry, whatever it might be that you find some form of pressure on, I guarantee that if you really nail down to what it's about, it's usually focusing something you can't control, but you want to control it. Anxiety is quite literally us feeling like we want to control something we can't control, but we want to control it. So if you are faced with a challenge, if you're faced with anything along that journey of yours on the ups and downs and thinking, how am I going to go about this? How am I going to get the best result from this? Go, can I do anything about it? What is in my control here? If there is something that's in your control, great, go and take action. If there's not, can you accept it? And try to flex that acceptance muscle along the way so that you go, okay, this is something I can't control. For me, many times I've been faced with challenges where I've had to look at it and go, can I do this? Can my body do this? Can I actually achieve this thing? And sometimes I've had to go, no, there's nothing I can do about it. I can't do anything about my body. I can't change it. So can I accept it? Can I accept that I have the condition that I have? Yes. Because if I don't accept it and I spend all my time thinking, what if I had this other part of my body, I'm just going to suffer. That doesn't help me. It doesn't help myself. It doesn't help the people around me. It doesn't help me in trying to achieve what it is that I want to achieve. So ask yourself these 2 very simple questions, but they're maybe not easy to get to the answers to. And it takes practice. It takes time to get to the answers. It takes time to get to the way in which you can just go through this process and constantly reframe. The power that I have in my life has been the one to reframe a negative situation into a positive one. But was I like that to start with? No. It took time to get there. It took time for me to be able to say, okay, this is a challenge. This is the negative story that I could tell myself, but I'm going to choose to tell myself this positive one, and I'm going to aim for that. And it takes practice. I took the negative story on many times before, and I've seen people do it over and over again. And so for you, it's just practice. It's repetition. It is quite literally reps of the mind. And that's why, for me, it's all about building mental strength. So I want to leave you with something right now, which is just a question that any challenge that you're faced with right now, any hurdle, that journey that you're on, whether you're on the upward slope or whether you're on that downward slope in going into maybe a bit of a valley, a challenging time, is that right now, if you're to look back on this moment in a year's time, what would you need to do in order to be proud of yourself? And think about the characteristics that you want to be as a human being, as an individual, the way in which you need to be in order to get something done for you, to achieve what it is you want to achieve, to get that performance. What is the character that you need to show and how you need to go about it in order to feel proud of yourself in this moment? Because I promise you, if you face it with character and you face it with strength, you by default will just feel proud of yourself after that. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in today. That's everything I've got for you. Once again, if you want to come over and say hello on the various different platforms and formats, please do. And let me know if there's any questions. And I look forward to connecting with people in the future. But thank you for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lewis. That was excellent. I've got a few questions, actually, if I may. Just spend the next 5 minutes just discussing some of what you've mentioned. But I think, as you just so everybody knows, we'll be sending a recording of this session around to anyone who's signed up, and also all the ways of getting in touch with Lewis will be available as well on that. But just kind of to pick up on some of the things you said, I mean, I think that kind of courage to be imperfect and that striving for perfectionism and realizing, that that actually it takes a lot of courage not to do that. And something that kind of struck me, because this can be something in business and in your personal life, but certainly in business, where it takes a lot of confidence to ask for help. I mean, it's something you did a lot along the way, but just being able to ask and open yourself up, being authentic enough to say, look, I don't know all there is to know about this. So how can I become better? And the power of asking. How have you find, some of the businesses you work with where you're maybe challenging leaders on that? Because there can be a little bit of an identity for leaders. They don't want to open that up, and they want to be seen to be or they put the pressure on themselves to be the ones that always have to come up with the answers. But actually being a little bit vulnerable and opening yourself up and saying, look, I don't have all the answers. How are we going to achieve this? And getting other people to input. What kind of feedback do you get when you work with businesses on that question, Lewis?
Yeah, I mean, even in business, there's a lot of people I work with. So my I guess, not niche, but where I've sort of ended up being selected by through the people I work with is helping out leaders, and especially young leaders and people who have potential to have or believed to have potential as leaders moving forward. No one is necessarily born a leader. It's not like a God-given right. It's not a thing that you just are. Yes, some people have more leadership characteristics through potentially upbringing, environments that they've been in on the way there. But for me, I just genuinely think leadership is a skill that you can develop. It is like anything else if you're willing to put in the effort to do that. And the best leaders that I see, so if I just go to the best leaders that I see, are the ones that are open to that. So even in sport, for example, you look at your Jurgen Klopp's, Guardiola's in football. I'm very fortunate that my old psychologist is the head of psychology at Man City. So I got to call him up and say, is it like working with Pep Guardiola? And he just said, look, this guy is unlike many people that I've come across in an environment that's a churning machine that is a Premier League football club such as them. He is still willing to say, I got that wrong. How do I get better? And he uses his support around him. So for him, he's got his support staff that work with him, and he sees them as a team. So they're a collaborative team rather than a hierarchy of a team. So if anyone understands the horizontal and vertical relationships, he doesn't see his colleagues on a vertical relationship above or below him. He sees them as horizontal. He sees them as all on the same page, and they're all able to collaborate. And it takes strength. It takes strength to be able to say, I'm willing to say, I don't know the answer, but it's actually the thing you need to do in order to be stronger, to be a better leader, because you can't do what you don't know, right? You can't say what you don't know. You can't give knowledge to something you don't know. And so through that learning process, growing, you give people in your team to do that as well. So I just believe, right, as a leader, it comes from your own values as well. So for me, as a leader or a self-leader, I never ask anyone I work with to do something that I wouldn't be willing to do myself or haven't done myself. So I never tell them, right, go and run this amount of miles or do this task with your colleague over here and have this conversation with someone. And that is something that I think if you are, it's kind of like the All Blacks when they had the sweep the sheds mantra in being able the best players in a team or the best leaders in a team do the lowest demanding job in which is sweeping the changing rooms, right? And so it's kind of removing your ego a little bit and saying, yeah, I can grow, I can get better, I am someone who's willing to learn. And probably inside you are maybe have some form of imposter syndrome where you're like, yeah, I do want to know. I don't feel I have all the answers, but I'm not willing to share with everyone that I don't know the answers. And that can be something like perfectionism. It's like, I need to show this perfectionistic image of myself. I need to show that I'm good enough and I'm worthy enough to do this role. But actually, the funny thing is, if you just say, look, I don't know the answer here, but I'm actually going, and you say the action that I'm going to take is to go and find the answers, that's a strong leader. That's someone that is, or even go, what do we want to do as a group? What do we want to do together to get there? And then make be a collaborative approach. So to move it from that feeling of it being a vertical relationship to a horizontal one, I think that tends to bring out the traits in a good leader from them to say, yeah, we're working together on that. I don't know if that answers everything, but there's so many things that can go into something like that. Really, it's a huge topic.
Yeah, it is. I know. So yeah, difficult to encapsulate it in just that. And just one more question, because I'm aware of time, but just something that struck me from everything you've said, and obviously hearing you talk before. You talk a lot about, getting your big break meant being on the bench a lot, but being willing to be there. And you saw that as an opportunity to learn from the best. You were seeing some England cricketers and the top of their game. And it just struck me the kind of conversations we've been having as a business, and I know when we interact with other organizations, they're having this. The challenge now organizations are having around hybrid working. So what I mean by that is, if you're younger and less experienced staff don't have as many opportunities, because look, as organizations, everyone wants to give flexibility, and they want to, there is a lot to be said from the flexibility we now have with hybrid working. But the flip side of that is that if you're experienced, dare I say, maybe older individuals, it suits them to stay at home more and not come into the office. Yet, and therefore the younger, maybe less experienced members of staff, they're just not seeing the people at the top of their game. They're not hearing it every day, and they're not seeing it every day. So how have you been working with organizations, around that topic of hybrid working to get the right balance? Because it's not about mandating, it's about getting a balance. Does that make sense?
100%. I think, yeah, we've had this conversation, haven't we? And there's definitely one that I think I have with other companies I work with, which is we for some reason, especially as I'm going to say adults in the room, like we forgot what it took for us to build the qualities that some people really find endearing and want from us. And again, I look at this from a like sport perspective. You wouldn't ask a football team, rugby team, cricket team, whatever it might be, to come into training 3 times a week and then actually perform on a Saturday or a Sunday, whenever their fixture is, and then think that that's going to be a high level of performance, or that the individuals in it are going to be developing the not only actual attributes that allow them to perform the skill and have a good performance, but the personality and the characteristics as a person to get there. So I then go back to, what's the motivation of the individuals working there? And I know we had a conversation around the interview process, right? So the interview process of bringing someone into your team and you asking, what is it that you want, not only from this job, but actually as a human being? What is it that you want to get? And if it is, I want to be leaving as a more confident and capable person. Okay, well then the cost of entry to that will be that you need to learn the skills, you need to learn the processes. And that's very difficult to do in your pajamas at home. That's very hard to do without being around people who are excellent at what it is. The reason I became good at the sport that I was in was not because I went and searched for all the right info, was because when I got into that changing room, when I got into that environment, I was surrounded by people who were world class at what they did. And I just through osmosis took on so much. And if I had only been in there 60% of that time, I have no doubt that I would have missed opportunities. And ultimately, I used to go in every day because I was like, I've got a bit of FOMO. I don't want to miss out on this learning opportunity that could be there for me to get where I want to be. So it's really important that we find out what the personal motivations are of the individuals in the room. So what do you want? Do you just want a paycheck? Do you just want this? But okay, well, even if you're driven by an extrinsic motivation of money, in order to do that, you're going to need the skill set. So there is a cost to whatever benefit that you're looking for. And I think we have, for some reason, kind of lost sight that we're trying to, similar to what I was saying earlier, if we try to create comfortable environments for people, we don't create resilience, we don't create characteristics for people in order to develop, and we do each other a disservice by not forming some form of structure and boundaries and format that we know works because it's happened for us, and we as maybe people who are more senior in businesses or in our industries, that we know worked for us, yet we're scared to say that's the thing that we should be doing because we don't want to get cancelled or we don't want to think. But it's like, in what world do we live in where that's not a truism? So it's an interesting one. I think we move ourselves into, if we look at those 4 quadrants, we move ourselves into a comfortable environment far too easily. There's some unrelenting environments, but I would also argue maybe people see unrelenting. It's a perspective thing sometimes, whether people see it as an unrelenting environment, and do people see fairly good environments as unrelenting due to the fact that they don't have the resilience and we haven't built that in people. So there's a lot to unpack there, but there's some stuff there.
Thank you, Lewis. I mean, it just from a recruitment perspective, when you're talking about those 4 quadrants, if you've got staff in the stagnant or even the comfortable quadrant, and of course the challenge, but definitely the stagnant and comfortable, they're the people you're going to lose. And, with skills shortages and retention being a real key priority for most of the organizations we work with, that's a big challenge. So I'd reiterate everything you said, just unpicking that and working out where your people might be and trying to work with them, as you say, trying to find those motivators is really key. But like I say, everyone can of course engage with Lewis afterwards and pick this up. I'm just going to finish with a quote, actually, that we've more a comment from somebody on the chat, Lewis, around your point on perfectionism. So they're just saying the point on perfectionism is really interesting. I'm currently working on a manager development program, and that has a section on good is good enough. We strive for perfection, but it isn't always needed. So I guess it's that kind of confidence to recognize that there's going to be challenges and I'm not going to be perfect all the time. But so that was just interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say perfection is what is perfection is subjective as well. So if anyone's familiar with Nadia Comaneci, who got the first perfect 10 in gymnastics, she even though she got a perfect 10, there's argument that she didn't believe that it was perfect. So perfect is never really good enough sometimes, because sometimes perfect is just subjective.
Exactly. Thank you. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. Thank you for your time. And I hope you found Lewis's story as inspirational as I have. A massive thank you to Lewis for his time today and for sharing his journey and those tips on mental strength and resilience. There's a lot in this, that he's covered in a very short time. So I would just encourage anyone, if this has piqued your interest, please reach out to Lewis. We will be circulating the recording of today's webinar, as well as an opportunity to connect with and engage with Lewis in the next 24 hours. So by all means, I'd encourage you to do that, because I think there's a lot that individuals and also organizations and businesses can gain from this. So that's it, everyone. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.